everyone, my name is Hadel-Lynn, and I've been living in Boston for the past year or so now, and I kind of wanted to make a little bit of a follow-up video to my first main Boston video, which is called 6 Things I've Learned Living in Boston. If you haven't checked it out, it should be right above me. I don't know if it's this side or this side. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe, and with that, let's get started. Unfortunately, there is no happy hour out here. Apparently, Boston has banned happy hours since 1984 in order to decrease the amount of drunk driving accidents, which I feel like is not as much as relevance as of now because parking and car insurance are so expensive, and even finding a place to park is difficult in Boston, which is why a lot of people don't have cars unless they live further out. And in addition, a lot of people take public transit anyway. Restaurants, they've been doing a bit of a loophole where they'll give you, a discount on the food, but you still have to pay full price for drinks, which isn't the same, but it's still a little bit of something. Sports is a big thing out here in Boston. So many different, sports teams to choose from just in Boston alone. You have the Celtics, you have the Red Sox, you have the Bruins. I think for soccer, they have like a team, I think it's called like New England Revolution. So obviously Boston takes its sports very seriously, and I kind of knew that like Boston was a very big sports town, but I didn't understand how big of a sports town until they started hosting block parties. I'll give you a really good example. During the NBA finals, the city was hosting various block parties. So I went to game 4 when they were hosting it over at Copley Square, and that was just an eye-opening experience. First off, there were like hundreds of people. It was kind of more college kids though, but because it was free, but that doesn't matter. There were hundreds of people in Copley Square. I had the experience of being like on top of a park bench just to watch the one screen that was there, which by the way was poor planning on Boston's part. They should have had at least 3 in my humble opinion. Say though, being at a block party or just like watching the game in general, it's a pretty cool environment. I'm usually one that like doesn't really watch sports, but I think Boston is kind of rubbing off on me where I'm like, okay, I can at least watch basketball because maybe that's the one sport that I can understand the most. I want like a really, big sportsy environment. TD Garden, there are a bunch of sports bars nearby. Game 6 of the NBA Finals, they were hosting a block party in Fenway Park, and people who lived in Boston, they could have gotten tickets for free. I did not go because all the finals, they started at 9 p.m. and I may have gotten sleepy around 3rd and 4th quarter because they had to start so late. But overall, I feel like Boston is starting to rub off on me where I'm like, okay, I can at least watch one sports team. The T is not always perfect. There have been a few stereotypes for each line, like the red line catches on fire. The blue line, it's nice, but not so many people take it. The orange line tends to be the oldest cars, but pretty reliable. While the green line has been having issues lately about crashing into one another or just having a million stops to where it just takes forever and delays are pretty often. On the map, a lot of the lines, they're like going straight this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. They're going like all out, but there aren't enough trains that are just, intersecting in between. Because if you fall like outside of those realms that are not in like those straight lines, you have to take a bus. The thing about buses is that they tend to run a bit more late compared to taking the T, just because, again, since buses have to typically be on the same street as normal cars, they tend to fall into traffic more often as compared to the T. I definitely think that more American cities should have extensive public transportation. I think overall though, probably the best public transportation in the US is New York, because they spent so much time developing like the train system to where like you could literally just take the train everywhere you go. While in Boston, even though they were the first to do it, since Boston is kind of, less land to work with and it's a lot older, it can be a little bit hard to kind of connect different communities. LGBTQIA plus community is very well supported here. It actually makes a lot of sense because Massachusetts was the very first state to legalize gay marriage. Since June marks Pride Month, there have been a lot of places that have been putting the Pride flag out there, including churches, which is a very new concept for me, even coming from California. At the church I go to, there are different community groups that you can go to. So there is a group specifically for allies, and then there's a group specifically for members of the community, which honestly, like, props to Boston for doing that. That's such a new concept, and I think a lot more places should be doing that. Years there hasn't been a Pride festival because, one, due to COVID, and two, because the Pride organization actually dismantled due to some differences. However, what they've been doing differently this year is having pretty much events pretty much throughout the majority of Boston every single day, you know, in relation to the topic of LGBTQIA+, which I think is honestly really cool, that it's not just like a one and done thing. It's a continuous learning experience throughout this entire month. There's even a heritage trail that you can take self-guided, or you can, you know, pay for a tour. It's called the Equality Trail in Boston, which I think is honestly really inspiring and nice to hear about. I haven't personally been on the trail, but I think just the concept of it is so beautiful. The fact that there is a history behind it, especially in Boston. Definitely go down and watch the Boston Marathon at least once in person. The marathon tends to happen like every April, and this year was kind of different from last year, but in a positive way. So typically what happens is, for the marathon, they build like this giant, I don't know how to describe it, it kind of looks like an arc de triomphe around the finish line. So the people who are running the marathon, they're like running, the finish line is right here, and there's like something on top where I think the commentators, they can kind of like look down and be like, oh look, you finished. It's great because the weekend before the marathon, you have the opportunity to kind of walk around. They allow you to take pictures and photos, and there's like a beer garden. So obviously it's a really great time, and I think it's a great booming time for business during this time, because there's a lot of tourists coming from all around the world just to run this marathon and to even support people who are running the marathon. I would say probably a day or two before they start kind of boarding up or getting off, you know, the route for the marathon. So you obviously cannot cross over because there is a marathon. Try not to bring too much stuff if you're going to go watch the marathon, because there are a lot of security checkpoints. Enjoy the holidays and the cultural festivals. St. Patrick's Day is a really large celebration here, primarily in Southie, just because Boston has the highest concentration of Irish Americans. There's usually a festival in Southie held every year. It's like a parade basically. You can watch. It's usually really popular with college kids because you can get really drunk and you can get a lot of drink deals going on. And it's fun for kids because typically you get to be, if you have kids, you can be more in the front, and they tend to throw out free stuff for you, and they tend to prefer obviously giving free stuff to kids so that it's a fun and memorable experience. Italian cultural festivals in the North End, it always has so much food and fun and entertainment, and this is such a bright and fun experience, as the North End is primarily considered like, quote unquote, like a little Italy, but please call it the North End. Do not call it Little Italy. That's just wrong.
People love to sleep.
Absolutely love how quiet it is in the mornings. I'm an early riser. Like, waking up at 6 in the morning is not a problem for me on a normal basis. I'd say people in Boston typically don't like waking up until maybe 10 in the morning or so. So that's a positive. If you're someone who likes to sleep in, Boston is a great place for you. And if you're an early morning riser and you want to, you know, maybe get some steps in, walk around feeling safe, and just, you know, have a nice stroll without not too many people around, you can also do that too. Take a hike. I'll give you a pretty brief review over the 3 hiking spots that I've been in Boston. Hammonds Pond is over at Chestnut Hill, where you can just take the green line all the way. It may take a while, and then you walk a bit past a mall, and it's such a nice area to kind of walk around. It's kind of weird that the entrance is right by a parking lot, but it's overall pretty nice. There's different trailheads that can lead you to different spots. I'd say this hike is pretty light and kid-friendly and overall fairly brief if you want just a nice little stroll, basically. The second hiking spot that is still a bit accessible through public transportation but a little bit more challenging is probably Middlesex Fells. Middlesex Fells, you got to take the orange line all the way to Oak Grove, so that's the end of the orange line basically, and you have to walk about 10-15 minutes or so, and the trailhead is with a bit past a residential area, but that area, there's so many different trailheads that you can go through, and honestly each time I go there are new spots that I find. The most challenging one I would say is Blue Hills Reservation. Unfortunately, this one you're going to need a car because it is huge and there are so many different areas that you can hike in, but I really wish if I had the opportunity, I wish I could hike there a bit more. You'd probably need to rent a car or take an Uber to get there, but it's really nice and it's really big. I feel like the best spots where you can get a pretty nice view of Boston is probably Blue Hills Reservation and Middlesex. Is a bit different compared to the West Coast. Obviously, we are not New York. New York is very well known for its up-and-coming fashion trends. Boston, I feel like, is a little bit different. The best way I can describe it is if you watch Legally Blonde, I feel like that difference is such a big thing. I feel like the clothing styles that people wear in Boston are a bit toned down and a bit more conservative, I guess, in a way, compared to the West Coast. Obviously, Bostonians are not conservative people at all, but I think the fashion sense is a bit different because you have to take into account that Boston is much colder than the West Coast. So obviously you have to put on layers whenever it's cold, and it's cold a good amount of the time. Prepared for the occasional subtle racist moments. People have been very respectful to me, but it's just the subtle racist moments that can be a bit annoying. I've never felt unsafe. Like, keep that in mind. I've never felt unsafe, but it's just more an annoying occurrence that I have to deal with. One, I have been confused for my other fellow Asian coworkers who look nothing like me. Used to being misidentified. For instance, I've been catcalled like, "Hey, konnichiwa, you're beautiful," and you know, I'm not Japanese. As far as I know, I don't look Japanese at all. Probably, if you don't know what a person is, at least ask a question in a polite way. Horrible example of a person trying to ask my identity was actually, I have had a Caucasian reporter. I wish I knew what group they were with. I had a Caucasian reporter come up to me and ask me if I speak Mandarin, and without even letting me have the opportunity to say, no, I don't, they started speaking to me in Mandarin. And I feel like if you know how to speak Mandarin, you should know, I mean, okay, maybe you shouldn't assume that people who look a certain way only speak Mandarin, but I feel like you should at least let people answer the question before you embarrass yourself and make yourself look worse and culturally illiterate. Subtle racist things I've had to deal with, and unfortunately, I know that this is probably something I'm gonna have to deal with wherever I go. Maybe wherever I go, it can vary on how subtle or overt it is, but unfortunately, I just know that this is something I have to deal with my entire life. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it really helps for anyone who's considering living in Boston. If you're interested more about life in Boston, check out my Boston Living playlist here, or here, whichever one I posted it on. Please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps. And I wish you all a very good night.